Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. So why am I having Amy on my podcast? Well, in the theme of ordinary people, although Amy and I are far from ordinary, doing extraordinary things, Amy's had a life that defies logic sometimes. Tons and tons of great times, tons and tons of horrible times, like many of us have. And one thing that she has is resilience, which is my least favorite word, because we look at this as a compliment. Oh, Amy, you're so resilient. But to be resilient, you have to be constantly struggling and to decide every day while you're struggling not to stop struggling. That's resilience. So why we would encourage people to be resilient sometimes is mind-boggling, because sometimes the best thing I can do is crawl into my bed and stop struggling and stop fighting and stop trying. So in that spirit, I want to introduce you to little A, Amy, who I met in a freshman health class, or perhaps it was personal fitness, indoor track, Amy's freshman year. She loved running, but I made her throw the shot put indoors. And that was the beginning of a long history for us. So hi, Amy.
Hi.
So I will say, Amy has been a big part of my own traumatic experiences. She was with me through my job loss and all that I went through with that family. She was with me in the years after I lost my job, when I was trying to maintain and create happiness for Gracie and Molly. She came on family vacations with us. She just was a part of our lives. Gracie and Molly would go up and see her at her college. Then when Molly died, she was one of the first people to arrive at the hospital and have time with Molly. She spoke at Molly's funeral. Our connections are lifelong, and I imagine for a long, long time in the future, we'll still be connected. What I would like for Amy to share with you is just what she remembers of what it was like to grow up in New Hampshire in all of the craziness and normalcy at the same time that was her life, and sort of how our connecting is from her perspective.
That was a fun time in my life. Okay, so I grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire. And then when I was 12 turning 13, I have three sisters. Their father murdered their mother and he went to jail. And so at the age of 13, I had three new sisters move in. At this time, it was just my brother and I. So our lives as well got turned chaotic pretty quickly. I was close with the mom as well. I was kind of grieving, but also getting used to completely life-changing events within my own family, which was really tricky to balance. And that was when we moved to Deerfield. And that was a really rough year. That was my 8th grade year. And I just didn't know what I was doing or who I was, where I fit in. And everything with my family was going on because the court cases lasted for years. And it was just, I lost myself a lot at that point in my life. So when I started 9th grade, freshman year at Concord, I'm pretty sure I met you right away in the fall. It was the gym in the classroom is what they called it.
Yeah, personal fitness, whatever it was.
Yeah, and I just remember sitting there and being like, oh my gosh, I really like her a lot. Like, I just remember being like, she's a really cool teacher. And then I started opening up to you because I started having like, high school was overwhelming for me. I was still dealing with everything with my sisters and my own battles with mental health and depression and anxiety. And I didn't really know what I was doing. And you were really the first person that I went to one day when I was struggling because I felt like you were approachable. Right from that moment, like you were super supportive of me. I remember you gave me these little passes that I could use in class if I needed a break. Like you were just really willing. You talked to my other teachers. You really helped me get through those formative years. And then I think it was middle of freshman year because it was springtime. Cross country was in the fall and I didn't do it freshman year. I did it sophomore year. So it was springtime. That was when I met Molly and Gracie. Things at my house were just still hectic because, as you can imagine, my sisters needed a lot of my parents' attention, which is completely understandable. But my brother and I I wasn't really fully getting what I needed at home. So when I met you and Molly and Gracie and started babysitting them, I kind of just instantly felt like I fit somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, no, I get it.
Yeah, in a time where I felt like I didn't really belong anywhere. So I feel like, at that point, I moved into your house. I lived there pretty much my entire high school career.
Yeah, I'm in
But
the
that
room
was,
that you slept in all the time.
oh,
That's where I'm
really? Yeah.
located. Yeah.
Molly and Gracie made the sign that said Little A's room and had it on the door for
Yeah.
all those years. Yeah. And I remember it just giving me, it really helped put me on a path of figuring out myself
Right.
because that was a
Right.
time in my life I had no idea who I was. It was not fun.
Well, and that's high school for people with the best of circumstances. And I remember in that, PE in the classroom class, your desk was to my right, front row, like
Mhm.
nearest the windows there in that downstairs room. I remember where people sat. But I do remember right away noticing that you were just always looking to talk and that sort of thing. But my biggest memory of a lot of those years was that I met your family. Molly, my daughter Molly, became friends with your littlest sister Katie, and your mother, who was also utterly overwhelmed and in over her head with the well-being of these three children, and very aware that she was backburnering her kids. It was
Mhm.
probably hard for you to see at that time because you're the one feeling the brunt of where am I and who am I. We developed a nice friendship where she was willing to let me say, you know what, Janine, back off. She's fine. She's making good choices. She's at my house with my daughter. She's not out partying. Like there were times when
Mhm.
your mom, I think in her panic, wanted you home. And it was like, you know what? She's fine here though. Like, take a break. One less person to worry about. Just other times where lots of things were going on and you would hear a funny story I remember is when there was a tornado in Deerfield and you were
Oh
on the
my God.
phone with me. I'm like, relax. It's not a tornado. If it was a tornado, the sky would be green and this and that. And it was a tornado.
I was like freaking out.
Like, okay. But that's a good analogy for how a lot of your life was, I think. I think that we live in a culture sometimes that thinks little girls are drama queens and panicky. And as you now know as an adult, following your own mental health journey and what it's like to grow up and learn and grow and everything, you had a lot going on anyway, let alone three children who went from two parents essentially to no parents. And now their parents are your parents. That whole dynamic is mind-boggling to me.
It was very
Um,
confusing because it was like grieving somebody who I loved while also like figuring out a whole new life and a whole new family. And it was a really confusing time.
Well, and not having the chance to grieve the family that you lost. You lost your family too. It was you and your brother and your parents, and you were moving to a new town anyway. But now, not only were you in a new town, it was a whole new reality. And now what? Walk me through what college was like for you, and sort of how you ended up majoring in your major now. By the way, Amy's an amazing therapist. Not that I've ever been therapized by her, but I know that she is successful and doing well and happy in her job. So, college, what was that like for you?
A really big reality change because it was kind of my first time, and everyone goes through this. It's your first time on your own. You're living away from your family. You're trying to figure out what do I want to do? What direction do I want to go? And I feel like for me, given my circumstances I grew up in, I still wasn't sure of who I was, but I knew that I wanted to help people. That much I knew. So I remember saying, you know what, the best way to do that is I'm going to major in psychology. And I also love kids. So I was like, how can I do this both? So I minored in child development. My focus was on psychology, but with children. And I loved it. It was great. It was kind of a rough 4 years because I did, in the middle of all of that, had some sexual abuse that was happening that I came out about, which you came to court with me for. So that was kind of resurfacing. I think because the trauma I was dealing with at home with my siblings kind of took over for a while. So trying to kind of navigate that and stay on top of school and stay on top of having friends and being social
Right.
was a really hard reality check for me. But I look back at that time now and it definitely made me, as we use the word resilient, it made me realize how strong I was to get through all of that because I really was kind of just thrown into it. But it was the best thing I could have done.
Yeah, I remember coming to visit you. It was like a 20-minute drive. So college ends, and did you go back home or did you go to Maine? What did you do after college?
So I graduated and then I got into Masters of School Counseling in Rivier University. I finished my degree. I was living kind of everywhere. I'd stayed with my grandparents a lot. I stayed at home. I stayed at your house. I kind of
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
wherever I wound up, I wound
Yeah.
up. But I did. I went full time into my master's program. I graduated that and was a school counselor for a year and a half, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
Well, because
Um,
you have public education is you can't really
yeah,
do it. You can't, you have to, yeah. I can
It
imagine that it wasn't what
it
you
was a
thought.
lot. And it was like I played a lot of different roles. And I would say like maybe 5% of my job was actually therapy, but it was
Yeah.
like 20 minutes with a kid at lunch. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I think I kind of felt I was forced into the educational side of things. My mom's
Yeah.
a teacher, my whole entire family. So I kind of feel like there was that expectation that that was kind of the role I should
Right.
be in. But then I realized that this isn't what I want to do. So by the time I graduated Riviere, I had met my now husband, Josh, and I think we were moving in together right around that time. I had moved to Maine because I lived in Maine before I moved in with him. I remember going to him and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I need to go back to school. I want to be, like a clinical therapist. And so we looked into what I had to do, and I went back to University of Southern Maine, where I got my certificate of advanced study in mental health. And that allowed me to get my license to be a clinical therapist. So that's kind of how I wound up on that path. I kind of took a weird way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, it's actually the logical way because it was an experience-based process, not I'm going to do all these classes and then you did all the classes and then went out and realized, nope, this isn't what I want. So I'm going to try this. Nope, I think I need to do this. So that actually makes a lot of sense. We should give children more latitude to discover themselves this way.
I feel like that was a big thing for me, like making that decision, because that was the first time in my life that I really made a decision for me and focused on what was best for me and not everything else going on in my life. So that was a big life changing moment for me.
New Hampshire for high school and college and some grad degree, Maine for some more education. And then you took a massive move. What happened after Maine?
So we back in 20, oh my gosh, this must have been 2017 was when we moved. My then boyfriend at the time, now husband, his job got bought out by a company in Wisconsin. And at first we didn't know who it was that bought them out. So we were like, oh, where are we going? Are we going to Hawaii? Are we going to California? Like, this is great. And they're like, nope, you're going to Kewanee, Wisconsin. And we were like, what? Like, had never heard of it, never thought about it. But his company was like, let us fly Amy out so she can also see it, because he was out there kind of getting introduced and used to the new company. And so they flew me out and I loved it. Like,
Yeah.
gorgeous. Fell in love with it. It was the little town right on the water. And my husband and I were in a place where it was time for us to kind of make our own life. We both had
Yeah.
roots back in New England and we needed to kind of get away and build our own roots. That was a really great step for us to take too. And I feel like it made us stronger.
So this illustrates another sort of dichotomy in life. So of course, having a healthy family and connections to family is considered important and strong. But like your sort of non-conscious way of suddenly ending up as a public school employee because that's what you sort of felt you were supposed to do
Mhm.
illustrates how sometimes we accept these family roles even though they aren't really what we want because oh I should do what's expected or this is what my family does. And I remember because I was sad that you were leaving because you're a big Molly connection for me. And so anytime I was losing a piece of Molly, it was hard for me, which is my own issue to deal with. But I remember your conversation and you saying to me, we both have ties to our family and all these expectations. And so if we're away, it's just us now. Like we're making decisions based on what we want, not what the phone call and the parent 10 miles away or 20 miles away or the sister or the brother or the social group, friends. Some of your friends at that time were quite opinionated,
Yeah.
had ideas on what you should and shouldn't do, they and their moms. I remember that. And I remember, thinking what a good, that was such a good move. I went off to college and didn't come home for 8 or 9 years. That was only an hour or 90 minutes away, but coming back, it was amazing how I fell back into sort of expected roles. So you go to Kewanee. I went there to see you, and it was freezing cold, the polar vortex, that horrible.
Yep.
You go out there. Did you work in a clinic? Like, what did you start to do with your clinical mental health training?
So I was actually finishing it up when we moved, and it was all the rest of it was online. So it worked out perfect. So while I was finishing that up, I worked in a daycare in Wisconsin, which I loved. It was great. I met a lot of really cool people. One of my best friends, Keegan, who I'm sure you remember,
Oh, yeah.
is the daycare owner, and that's how I met her. And then once I finished school and I was getting licensed, I got offered a job as an in home therapist. So I worked with a team. It would be myself and a colleague, and we would tag team families. So we would do family sessions individual sessions and parenting sessions. So each of our clients were getting 3 sessions a week, basically. And so that was a really incredible way for me to kind of get my feet wet in the fields, because I got thrown into a lot of really, when you're going into people's homes, you're in the trenches of it.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of experience really quickly. And the person that I was paired up with, named Michael, he was amazing. And he really helped form those foundation years for me when I was figuring out who I was as a professional too.
Yeah. You came into your job. So you're walking into a home and you're going to survey the room, so to speak, notice the body language and the dynamics of the family, little kids, medium kids, older kids, parents, all of that. So your own life gave you relatively normal beginnings, maybe some typical social issues at school, massive trauma of, your best friend's mother at the time being murdered by her father, and now suddenly these people are in your life. Total upheaval at home. You meet me, you go through meeting me and growing up, and then Molly dies, my Molly. And so there's this massive trauma. So by the time you sort of crossed all the T's and dotted the I's on all your educational certificates, you'd already lived through a lot more than the average person, plus the sexual assault piece, which took a back seat to a lot of other things going on. So you come into it not with some fluffy life, like, oh, I've been lucky, so I'm going to help people who aren't, blah, blah, blah. You're coming into families with a family dynamic of your own that's intense and positive and negative and wonderful and horrible. And how, if at all, do your experiences weigh into how you work with kids?
It definitely plays a big role. I connect really well with kids and adolescents because I know what it feels like to feel lost and like you don't belong somewhere and just really confused about everything. So I feel like my experience with the traumas that I went through really gave me insight and experience to not just help them, but relate to them too. Like I understood them. I wasn't just sitting there saying, oh, I'm trained in this. Oh, let me help you. Like I truly understood what a lot of these kiddos were going through. And I remember the first family I worked with, it was my first day on the job and I was so nervous. And I walk in and it was a blended family. So it was mom, dad, different kids from different parents. And there was like 7 kids and they were all just sitting in a circle staring at me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Like, this is really overwhelming. But I did, I jumped right in. And that was one of my favorite families I ever worked with. When it was kind of an ironic first family to start with too, because there was a lot of similarities there.
Well, and probably that internal chaos.
Yeah.
We were a family unit with a certain description, and this is a family unit, and now we're together. So those don't exist anymore. But what the heck is this? And that was, you went off to summer camp, wherever you went, one person, and came home, had to be another. Let's talk about your weddings, because it's just a fun little segue before we go into your next big giant life change. So from my perspective, I was like incredibly honored to be asked to. So for those of you who don't know, Amy asked me would I perform her wedding. So I started the process of becoming a JP for the state of New Hampshire, thinking, okay, I have several months. Then found out I had 9,000 brain tumors in my head. So I had to have surgery. In the process of that, actually, I'm going off all my meds. Molly's died. I've had a terrible 2 years. I'm trying to get better. I'm going to try to have a baby, but nobody knows this yet. I'm going off all my meds for a mouth condition. My face is killing me, so I can't stay off the meds, but I can't have a baby on the meds. So I have an MRI to see if I can fix my mouth and fix the nerve in my head. And they find a giant brain tumor, which was horrifying. So I hadn't told anybody this. Nobody. It was like December 10th. It was a Wednesday. I had not told a soul. I had gotten the call. So like maybe 6 hours later, or maybe the next day, you call me on the phone. And you're like, what's happening to you? What's going on with you? Are you okay? And what's going on with Robin? And so Robin is just a person in our life that who shall not be named. But what was going on was I had just had a friendship ending event with Robin, which I've talked about in past episodes, which was significant. And at that time, and found out I had these brain tumors. You didn't know any of these things, but you call me on the phone to say, what's going on with you? So tell everybody what happened, that you knew that something was wrong with me and that Robin and I were no longer friends.
So I was at a Christmas party for work, actually, and we were at this like bar pub place, and I'm sitting there with Michael and my colleagues, and this woman comes up to me and she goes, I just have to tell you something. And I was like, okay. And she's like, I don't know why, but I really just feel like the letter M when I stand next to you. And I was like, okay. And she's like, yeah, it seems like a young girl. And I was like, oh my gosh, like she has to be talking about Molly. And I was like, yeah, I think I might know what you're talking about. And she said, she's telling me something about fire. Take everything and burn it. And I was like, ooh. And that's when I knew I'm like, something's going on. She's like, I don't know anything other than that, but she came to me and really wanted me to tell you that. And I was like, okay. And that's when I knew. I was like, I gotta call Big B, because that's what I called you. And I was like,
Yeah.
something's wrong. And that's when I picked up the phone
Yeah.
and called you.
Yeah. Well, and I remember too, she wanted you to know that I was going to be okay. So that was
Yeah, she
why,
did say that too. Yes.
yeah. So Amy finds out from some lady who's tending bar or whatever at the party that I'm going to be fine and I should burn everything. So some context. Yes, I was going to be fine. I found out that the tumors were benign and they just needed to come out, that I wasn't going to die from these tumors. But Molly wanted to make sure that I knew that, is
Yeah.
how I remember the conversation. And then the other piece, the take everything and burn it. So when I had a falling out with this friend of mine, Robin, years ago before Molly died, Gracie and Molly and I were heavily involved in this woman and her business and everything else. And so we took every article of clothing that had the name of the business on it. We took anything that was related to that episode, those events in our lives. It was Halloween and we were having a campfire. We held the t-shirts and the leotards and the shorts and the jackets, hundreds of dollars worth of clothing. And we would say a good memory because we wanted the good energy to go up, and then we burn the article of clothing. And it was so cathartic, like that was Molly's way of saying, just move on, mama, just burn it. But that was profound to me in those moments where you want to believe that there's another side. That was a huge connection for us. And you were in Wisconsin, so this lady certainly had never met Molly.
Yeah,
And
and she had no clue who I was. I had never
right.
been to this bar before, and she just randomly came up to me. She's like, I'm being really drawn to you. I feel like I have to tell you something. I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, tell me. So before I was a head shaven, tumorless, recovering person, Amy had called to say she was planning on getting married the following summer. So the summer of 2019, like in August. But life being what it was, and medical insurance being what it was, and just life in general. It's funny, the week that I was supposed to perform your wedding, my stepson Davey had a secret beach wedding with his wife. And then they had a big wedding 2 weeks after yours in
Oh,
August.
that's,
It was like
yeah.
two people in my life, you and Davey. So and it was the same thing, medical insurance and all the logistics of being a married couple that make life financially easier and all this. So now suddenly I needed to go to Wisconsin, but I only had like a month, and you can't become a JP in a month. So my religion, the Baha'i faith, is Baha'i marriages are recognized as legal marriages. There's certain things that have to occur, like a series of steps to follow. So I said to Amy and Josh, if you'd be willing to just follow these steps, I can perform your wedding in Wisconsin. We found the Baha'is from Oshkosh, and so this wonderful couple came down. We set the date. It was going to be Martin Luther King weekend, and then the brain tumor surgery. So I had my brain tumors taken out January 10th, and I woke up bald and with a big scar and bruise and everything else. So I have to call you and say, I can't do it. Like Amy, being Amy, says, no problem. We'll just move it back a few weeks. So I get on an airplane like Super Bowl weekend, less than a month, less than 4 weeks after my surgery, having my
Yeah.
head cut open from ear to ear, basically. My neurologist was fantastic. He's like, if I say no, are you still going to go? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'll be careful, but yeah, I'll still go. So I got the clearance and everything to go. And it was such a wonderful weekend. I got this long maroon dress. I bought you each a necklace, so you'd have some little trinket to remember the week by and all that kind of stuff. And this wonderful couple from Wisconsin, that woman shows up and they're both wearing, they matched. Like he had a maroon shirt and she had like a maroon in the pattern on her dress and all this. And I'm like, look at us, we match. She goes, yeah, I had the weirdest dream. This little girl kept coming to me in my dream, telling me what we should wear. And so I said to my husband, here, somebody says you're supposed to wear this shirt. And so when I told her about Molly, she figured that that was Molly wanting us all to match. But so the reason I like that story, and then how much fun we had at your wedding the following summer in New Hampshire, is that it just epitomizes to me the one thing I like about culture now is that we have our families, but we also have our chosen families. Like we choose connections in life that become familial connections to us. And you'll always be a part of my family. You just always will be. You'll always be more to Gracie than just one of mommy's former runners or students, like just those connections. And yeah, and then you had to mail me the marriage license because I signed it in the wrong place. Do you remember that?
Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, it all worked out just fine. Yeah.
It was
So,
fun. It was
yeah.
good.
So we leave Wisconsin, or I do, and life is for you. It's staying the way it is. And like a month later, what happens?
So my birthday is in March 14th, and we went to Florida to visit my aunt and uncle and cousins. And Josh had never been to Florida before. So this was his first time going, and I was all excited. And of course, it's still polar vortex in Wisconsin. I don't know how we survived that. And we get to Florida, and my husband looks at me and says, "Why are we still in Wisconsin? What are we doing?" And I was like, "I agree. Like, it would be really cool to try to come live in Florida." And we're like, "Okay, cool. So let's, like, 6 months to a year. Let's make that our goal." So we get home from Florida. We had a great trip, and I just started researching. Like, I was just kind of dipping my toes in the water, reaching out to different places. And I found this one job for Elite DNA. And at first I was like, "What's Elite DNA?" Like, well, and I kind of had to search it a little bit. And they were looking for an in-home therapist. And I was like, "Oh, interesting. Okay, like, let me just connect with them and kind of see." So I had an initial conversation, which led to an interview, which led to a formal interview, which led to them offering me a job. And this all happened in the time span of like a week. And it was more than what I was making in Wisconsin. So it was a good financial move for us. Plus, we were so sick of the cold at this point.
Yeah.
So I called my aunt and I was like, "Well, we'll be there in 6 weeks. Can I live with you until we find a place to stay?" And my aunt was like, "What happened to 6 months?" So we joke about that. And we turned around, and in 6 weeks, we sold our house and packed up all our things and moved to Florida. And by the time I went down 2 weeks before my husband, and I found us an apartment. And so by the time he arrived, it was move-in day at our apartment. So it all kind of just fell into place.
Wow. Wow. That was very fast. So you stayed in Florida for a handful of years, had two babies. You have a pretty interesting in the sense that with all the politicalization of female body parts, your childbirth journey was wonderful, but not easy. So you have Molly Grace, which is a wonderful name, and then Charlotte. Talk a little bit about what your job was like in Florida and becoming a mom.
That was a very amazing time in my life, but also very challenging. So we got married in August, and I found out I was pregnant in October. So again, it happened very quickly. I remember, like, when I was growing up, I always talked about this. I always wanted to be a mom. Like, that was my biggest goal in life. I just always wanted to have kids of my own. So I was so excited. And then I forgot about the parts of pregnancy that suck with getting sick and all of the hormonal changes. I really actually had to take a step back from doing in-home therapy, and I switched to office-based therapy. At that point, I was working closer to home. It was just easier. My office was very supportive of me, anything I needed. They were really great. My pregnancy with Molly was fine until the last trimester. Well, I take that back. The first trimester, I was super sick. Second trimester, I did great. I was like a whole new woman. It was awesome. Third trimester, I started getting hypertension issues with her. And so I just felt like crap. I ended up getting bed rest. I couldn't like leave it was awful. And then this was also all in the height of COVID. So not only was I dealing with that, but I was about to have a baby in the height of COVID. And I was terrified because I was told my husband might not be able to be there. So I was freaking out.
Yeah.
And I have anxiety anyway. So I was like, "Screw you. I'll give birth at home before you tell me my husband can't be there."
Yeah.
And it all worked out and it was fine. And it actually was kind of nice that nobody else was allowed there in a sense, because it was a really intimate moment for Josh and I to share together. Her labor was really hard. They had to induce me because of the hypertension. And I got to all 10 centimeters when it was time to push, and she got stuck. Her heart rate spiked. So because her heart rate spiked, they said, "We need to get you down for an emergency C-section." So now I'm panicking because I'm all drugged up on, birthing medications. And now they're telling me I have to go. And it happened fast. And I just remember looking over at my husband, and I was bawling. And Josh was like, "It's okay. I'm going to be there with you. It will be okay." He had to come after. So they wheeled me down first. And I just remember him coming in and holding my hand. And the next thing I knew, she was here. And that was a really intimate moment too, kind of watching. The thing that sucks about C-sections is you can't do that skin to skin right away. But Josh got to do skin to skin with her right away. So he got to clip the cord. I looked over, he was holding her little finger. Like it was, or she was holding his, I should say.
Yeah.
And it was the cutest little, just like tender moment. And then our whole entire, I went on maternity leave. With COVID happening at this point, we had already transitioned to working at home. So I was on maternity leave. And then when it was time to go back to work, I was like, can I stay virtual? Like and I'm someone who I always thought I would hate working virtually.
Pros and cons.
Yeah, no, I love it. I never want to go back into an office ever again. But my work has always been very supportive of me. They've been really great. And they were like, "Yeah, that's fine. Like, you can stay virtual, like whatever works for you." I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome." So now I'm a new mom, like getting through maternity leave. but now I get to work from home and keep my baby home with me. So
Right.
that was really nice. But it was a very big, I just remember sitting there one night and being like, staring at Molly and just being like, our entire world just changed.
Yeah. What
Like
have I
it was
done?
just this, yeah, it was just this moment of like,
Yeah.
holy crap, panic, but also like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I succinctly remember that with Gracie putting her on the changing table one day. She had that little Moro reflex where they splay out, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I brought her here. Like for the rest of my life, I'm in charge of her. Like it was mind-boggling. Those are mind-boggling moments. And then when she was screaming nonstop and I'd be like, what have I done?
Oh,
What was
those
I
are fun.
thinking? So the company that you were working for, did you stay at the same place the whole time you were in Florida?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm still with them today too.
Oh, same. Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, I guess with the remote piece, do they have like therapists in all 50 states? Are they everywhere or?
They're only in Florida, but they're looking at expanding
Right.
out of state. They have like 50 plus locations right now in
So are your
Florida, though. We're
clients in
everywhere.
Florida?
Yes.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
Wow.
Except for I do private practice here in Maine too on the
Oh, yeah.
side. So I do have some Maine clients, but my primary caseload is Florida.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Boy, that's job security. I mean, you're in Maine right now. I'm in New Hampshire, but here we are chatting away. So,
Funny too, because I've gone through a lot. I just feel like this is important to know. I've gone through a lot of different roles with Elite, and they've always been very supportive. I went from, okay, I'm an in home therapist. Now I want to be an office clinical therapist. Now I'm remote. Now I want to stay remote. Then I started a program, a day services program for kids, which is basically just like intensive 5 days a week therapy all day program. Then that was a whole liability thing and didn't
oh,
end up succeeding. So then I went back to being virtual again, with them really giving me the choice. I remember I went to them and I was like, I think we're ready to move home to Maine. I really like this job though. Is it okay? Like, can we make that work? Like, what are the legalities with that? And I remember my boss saying to me, he's like, Amy, we would love if you would stay on it. You're already licensed here. You already work remotely. He's like, it doesn't matter where you are, it matters where your client is. So it all worked out, which was awesome.
yeah, that's fantastic. And that's beneficial to clients because they don't have to uproot and start with someone new. Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. As an educator and a school board member, I know that all of the ins and outs with COVID and all of the pressures put on families. Did you find that your job as a family therapist or a child therapist changed or became more intense or had indicative things due to COVID? Yeah.
It definitely did. And that was kind of when I started the day services program. And it was just like the transition period, the first like 2 years after COVID. And I actually, once we were like, okay, this program just isn't feasible, I got asked to take over their BHH program, which is behavioral home health. I'm still in that position today. I'm the director of the program. I oversee a team. We work with high risk clients. So we work with clients that have multiple hospitalizations, are at risk of going into the hospital, kind of like the significant diagnoses patients.
Yes, yes.
And we see them 3 times a week. They see a case manager 3 times a week, and we work with a psychiatrist as well. So it's a really intensive,
Yes.
more intensive than outpatient, but a step below the hospital.
Yep.
And I love it. I've been doing that now 3 years, 4 years, and it's awesome. So I work with adolescents and adults primarily now, but I definitely still see, I kept a couple of my kids that I've been with since I started, but just kind of seeing the change with them with COVID and where they are now and just kind of how it changed everything it's really interesting.
When I think of those high risk, high need behaviors and disorders that people can, find themselves with, so much of successful programming is your ability or a teacher's ability or a parent's ability or whomever, social worker, therapist, to be able to go with it. I just imagine listening to you talk that that's probably an incredible strength for you as a therapist. I can't imagine you being in a situation where what's happening is so overwhelming to you that it decreases your ability to function. I feel like probably a strength for you is your ability to ride it. Like, okay, we have this crazy ass motherfucking bad situation here. So what I need to do is see what happens next and be a stable facilitator. Like that's just my assessment of you. And that comes from watching you as a teenager and as a young adult and listening to you talk now. From all that you've been through and all that you are, do you feel like that's like, I know when you say to me, oh, I remember you gave me these passes and you let me talk. Because what I knew is that always at those times in my life, I just needed someone to be there. I didn't need some big giant gesture. I just needed someone to be like, hey, your voice has validity and here's a way you can go talk to somebody and here, let me clear the way for you. Like it was more of that acceptance. Do you feel like you're that way with your clients?
Yeah, definitely 100%. I always, in my own mental health journey and working with my current therapist now, that term validation comes up a lot because I spent the majority of my time growing up not feeling validated and feeling like I wasn't heard until I connected with you and made those connections. That's one of the things when I work with my clients, one of the first things I say to them is I want you to feel safe and I want you to feel validated. And whatever we need to do to make that happen for you,
Right.
please let me know. And they appreciate that. I just did an eval yesterday with a new patient who was like, "Oh my God, that's so great. Thank you so much. Like, you're taking the time to really establish a relationship with me. So I know that you care and it's a connection and it's not just someone sitting in a room
Yeah.
being like, oh, okay, tell me
Yeah.
how you feel."
Yeah. 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 That spring before Molly died, I was working at an intensive day program. It was kids that had either been expelled, had behavior issues that they could no longer stay in school, but their districts wouldn't approve them for a placement, like an out of district placement. So we paid them with tutoring funds. We were just considered their tutors. And they would come for like 3 or 4 hours a day. So I had this group of boys. We spent most of our time walking around downtown. I'd be like, all right, it's 10 o'clock. So for the next 30 minutes, we're talking about math. And there was this one boy, he'd get mad about something. And I'd be like, you know what? I'm going to own that on you. You're right. I did say this and I'm coming back on it now. So why don't we go walk around and like, I never ever called his mother and got him in trouble. Like, he did things he shouldn't do, but it was always a response to something. And he just didn't know how to respond better. Long story short, I met Hermanos the other night, and I brought him home here with this other little boy. He came up to me and said, "You won't remember me, but you saved my life." There he was. Like, I remembered him right away. We had this long conversation, and it was the same thing. He's like, "You just never told me that I didn't matter. You never told me I was bad. You never told me I needed to change. You always just let me figure it out, let me calm down without getting mad at me." That's you. Like, I feel like that's who
That was
you
a
are.
really big piece of my life. And when people, ask me just about growing up and my relationship with you and your family, and that's one of the things I always said is I was always made to feel like I was too much or that I wasn't validated. And you never made me feel that way. You gave me a space where I felt like I was heard and that, that I was still loved and I wasn't too much for the right people. And I tell people all the time, like, I would not have gotten through high school if it wasn't for you.
Well, I
Um,
wouldn't have gotten through a lot of my life if it weren't for you. So that's a mutual. I can see that you being that person to your clients. Like,
yeah.
you're the one therapist that isn't going to say, well, you have to do this, or here's a list of this. You would be more like engaging in a conversation. So this leads into something that you just shared with me right before we started recording and talking in your own mental health journey. There are certain disorders and disabilities that are unbelievably misunderstood and very, very sometimes difficult to treat, mostly difficult to have and live with. I remember you as very anxious. I also remember, though, sitting in the driveway out here, and you were having an unbelievably bad day, and you were curled up in a ball, and you couldn't even talk to me. And I got frustrated. I remember, and I'm like, look, I got to go inside. I don't want to be mad at you, but I'm just getting frustrated. I can't fix this, and I don't know what to do. And you would say one thing, then you get mad and say another. You were really, really struggling. And I went inside, and then I came back out a little while later, and you were still in my car. And we got through it. I mean, we came out, and Molly and Gracie were home. We totally worked through it. It was not an easy moment, though. It was one of maybe 2 or 3 out of 100 times together that I felt useless, kind of. I don't know what I'm doing here. I would have always pegged you as anxious, but I also would have thought, but sometimes she isn't anxious. Sometimes she's fine and has the capabilities to do X, Y, and Z. And then sometimes it's like she never heard of X, Y, and Z. So how can this be the same person? So talk a little bit about your mental health journey and what you now know and what that's like for you.
So growing up, I always had the label of, oh, she's just anxious. She has ADHD. Like no one ever really took the time to actually sit down and figure out what was going on. There was just so much other stuff happening
Right.
around me. Growing up, I always had mood issues. Like I would be back and forth. I would be happy, then I would be really pissed off, then I'd be crying because I don't know why. And it was always labeled as mood dysregulation. They never gave me a name for it. And then after I had Molly, in between Molly and Charlotte, I had a miscarriage. And I got pregnant with Charlotte like a month later. And my pregnancy with her was, oh,
Yeah.
I love her so much, but it was awful. And I actually ended up almost dying from her birth because they ended up, super long story short, I went septic after having her. They couldn't figure out what was going on. I was in and out of the hospital for like 6 months, literally almost died from going septic so many times. And they found out that they left a piece of the placenta behind and it had gotten infected. That's why I kept going sepsis. That made my postpartum terrible.
Oh, I can.
It was awful. I was so depressed. My moods were all over the place. Like I felt like I missed out on so much of the first year of Charlotte's life, which actually makes me emotional talking about it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of mom guilt there. But the first really 2 years of Charlotte's life was awful. And I remember last summer, shit just kind of hit the fan. I remember I just all of a sudden had this episode of my moods were all over the place. I was impulsive. I was making decisions that were not the best decisions. I was rapidly talking. I had all these grand ideas. Like I was just off my rocker. Something's wrong. Didn't really recognize it at first. It wasn't until like, because it was weird. I went through all this like heightened, and then I just crashed and I didn't leave my couch for like a week. Not even joking. Like Josh could not get me out of the house. And he came to me and he's like, we gotta figure out what's going on because this is something bigger than just a mood disorder or just anxiety. And so I found a psychiatrist up here because I had a psychiatrist in Florida, but not up here. She said, I think that this sounds like bipolar. And I said to her, I'm like, I've always had mood disorder label growing up, but I've never had manic episodes or depressive episodes like this. And she explained to me, she said, after you have children, people who have mood disorders are actually more likely to develop bipolar after. And she said, not to mention you went through a traumatic birth with Charlotte. And so I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And at first I was scared and I was really embarrassed because there's a lot of stigma around that diagnosis. And especially as a therapist myself, I was like, oh my gosh, like what, you just hear
I have the crazy therapist, right?
right. And so it just turned into this time of my life that I was just scared. But then I started doing research and I started working with my therapist and my psychiatrist I have now. I was with the other lady. She over medicated me. It was really bad. So I found my new psychiatrist and he's amazing and he's very informative. I just saw him this morning. He just gave me some tips and some education on things. And I really just learned to embrace the diagnosis because looking back now, I can say, okay, yep, I think of myself in high school. I think of myself, growing up in college and all of that makes sense. Where before I feel like it didn't make sense. I was just like, why is all of this happening and why am I feeling the way I do? And it took me a really long time to finally even just tell my family, like, hey, I got this diagnosis because I needed to process it myself for a little while.
Right.
Now that I have, I've become a really big advocate for it. It still sucks to say, but I'm not ashamed anymore, which ties into my work with clients. And, I'll tell clients, like they'll talk to me about, bipolar and those heavier diagnoses and how they are having a hard time with them. And I'll say, obviously not going to tell you too much about myself, but I'll tell you I understand. I have that diagnosis too. And that helps me connect with them. And they're like, wow, she really gets it. And so it's helped me there. It's helped me in my personal life. I've been on and off medications. When I was in high school, I was on so many different medications. Nothing worked. I'm now on like the perfect medications. Everything's going great. I feel the best I have ever. I've been working better. I'm a better mom. I'm super, not that I wasn't close with my girls, but my relationship with them has definitely shifted in a positive way. My relationship with my husband, that was a really big part of my journey and how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. It's just so difficult. I mean, I think it's human nature to want to be supportive and empathetic and loving to others. So it's much easier to be supportive to someone else that has this diagnosis. Then you get it yourself and you're like, oh, no, no, no. This isn't something I want to share, all the stigma that comes with it. My dad, who recently passed away, is bipolar. And when he looks back at his life, when he would look back, realize my grandmother. I have two siblings that have massive symptoms that indicate long periods of obsessing over one thing for months and then giving up on that and then just not thinking about anything. And so we think of manic depressive as high and then and sometimes it's not, the high and low isn't so easily described. For my family members, the highs when they were the manic phases were obsessive and perseveration on things. And then the depressive times were just self-loathing and depression. And you look back, when you can step back, life is like climbing a mountain. The longer you live, the better the view when you turn around because you've lived more. So things make more sense. You're getting a much bigger view than you have, when you're 10 or 15 or whatever. But when you were talking with me the little bit, and my mind's going through all of our different memories, it's like, oh, like that time in the car when you were really just falling apart. And I'm like, why is she not able to handle this today? Well, With a bipolar diagnosis, oh, of course, that's why. Wherever her brain is functioning right now isn't the place it was functioning when she could manage this. And the function of the brain, if we could step away from the judgments of society and look at the brain as an organ, then bipolar disorder is a brain malfunction that exhibits itself in ways that we can judge. If you're having an asthma attack, nobody judges that. But you're in a manic phase and everyone has 50 reasons why you're a terrible person.
And that's really what it was for me. Like, I was upset when I got the diagnosis, but then I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And I just felt this like relief of like, now everything from my past leading up to now, why I reacted the way I did, like that all just makes sense to me now.
Yeah.
And that big episode, it lasted like 3 months, and that's what got me the diagnosis of it. And since then, I've been doing awesome. I did recently have what they call rapid cycling, where you kind of just have like a little blip and you go through kind of like a little mini, basically. And certain things can trigger it. It's actually really fascinating. There's a lot of research on it. But recently I had a kidney stone and I got put on pain meds. And pain meds can trigger in bipolar people an episode. And I knew as soon as it started, I woke up one day and I was like, I feel weird. And then that night I stopped sleeping. And that's my biggest thing. I don't sleep. And I had like a week of no sleep. And by the weekend, I woke up on Saturday and I was like, I have this burst of energy. I want to clean my entire house. And I spent hours, I'm not kidding you, all day long cleaning the crap out of my house. Like, couldn't settle. Like, it was insane. Then the next day I just crashed and I was depressed. And that Monday I didn't get off my couch. I cried all day. And I was like, something's not right. So called my psychiatrist. I was like, this is weird. I'm pretty sure this is what happened. And they met with me right away and they were like, this is exactly what happened. But I was able to really stop and be like, okay, why am I reacting this way to things right now? Like, what's going on here? And I had the education and the knowledge of what was going on to do what I had to do to help myself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. And even still, even with all the knowledge and education, when it's you and you're in it, sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees, so to speak, because you're in the middle of it. So now here you are. You have a fabulous husband who I think is an amazing human being who has his own incredible life story. You guys really are perfect for each other.
He's my person.
Yeah, he is your person. Big time. Big time. I want to thank you for just being willing to just talk with me about your life and all that kind of stuff. One thing I like about podcasting is sometimes I'm just in my room talking to my computer about myself, and somebody in South Africa or Bali or Arizona or Massachusetts will listen to what could be just a boring story about life, right? And have some huge life-changing epiphany from one little piece of the story, which is what I like about doing it. What I like about having guests is the credibility that's given to the meaning and reality of our stories, and the credibility of our stories, and the validity of what we've gone through in terms of authenticity and our ability to help others is my favorite part of podcasting, because I never know what's going to make someone feel better. So is there anything that you want to say about yourself or life or anything before we end our little chit chat?
Thank you for allowing me to come on and talk. And I'm really big about sharing my story and advocating for others. Yeah. And so this was a cool way for me to be able to do that. And hopefully I help somebody feel like they're understood.
No, I think that you will. I think that you will. And, and I'd be remiss if I didn't really speak to how awesome your family is as well. I love following your parents on social media and seeing where their lives have taken them and their growth. I like checking in with your sisters and your brother and how they're all doing. It's just this long process of wading through the quicksand, so to speak, and not getting stuck in the muck.
We are all, all of us are, Katie's in college now, and my other two sisters are in Texas, and we're kind of all over the place, but we all still are connected and check in with each other. And my family are some of my favorite people in the world. Despite all of the challenges and everything we went through, they're still, solid rocks and foundations in my life, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah. Yay. First of all, I want to thank you, my little A, for, sharing and talking and being your usual, typical, wonderful self. So listen, be good to yourself. If you have a friend like Amy, spend some time talking to her, or listen to more episodes and listen to what my friends have to say. Be good to someone else. If you see someone struggling or working through something different, be a piece of what makes their resilience path easier. Help them out. Tell them to paint a word on their wall so they feel better about themselves. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly Head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.